didn't know was that in this glittering palace of wealth, surrounded by power and privilege, her necklace would soon shatter the illusion and change her life forever. Because even in the grandest room, one secret can bring the walls crashing down. Maxwell Carter didn't just enter a room, he consumed it. The moment he sat down at his private table, the energy of the restaurant shifted. Waiters stiffened, the maitre d' hovered nearby, and even the pianist faltered for a beat before forcing his fingers back to the keys. Maxwell was known not only for his fortune, but also for his temper. Stories circulated like urban legends. A sommelier fired on the spot for mispronouncing a vintage, a chauffeur dismissed after arriving 30 seconds late. People feared him because he thrived on control. Tonight was no exception. From the moment he ordered, his voice dripped with command. "A bottle of your best Bordeaux. Make it quick. I don't tolerate delays." His tone left no room for warmth. The man across from him, his business associate, nodded dutifully, jotting notes on a sleek tablet. Two bodyguards stationed at separate tables pretended to be diners, but their eyes never stopped scanning the room. Emma wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Maxwell's table. She had been assigned to quieter sections, the kind where anniversaries were celebrated with soft toasts or lone readers sipped coffee in silence. But fate intervened when another server slipped in the kitchen, twisting his ankle. The maitre d's frantic eyes darted across the floor before landing on Emma. "You, cover table 12, now!" Her stomach dropped. Table 12. Maxwell Carter's table. Taking a steadying breath, she approached, forcing her posture straight, her voice even. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Silver Crown. May I start you with your wine?" Maxwell barely glanced at her. His eyes flickered upward, registering her presence for a fraction of a second before returning to his phone. "Wine list," he muttered. "And hurry. I don't have time for incompetence." Emma nodded quickly, retreating to fetch the leather-bound list. Her palms were damp, her throat tight. She reminded herself, stay calm, stay invisible. This was survival. But Maxwell wasn't done. When she returned, he snatched the list without a thank you. Minutes later, when she poured the wine, he snapped, "Not like that. Tilt the glass properly. Have you never done this before?" His voice was sharp enough to draw glances from nearby tables. Emma felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her composure, correcting her angle. He leaned back, smirking. "Pathetic. I pay thousands to dine here, and they send me children playing waitress." His words cut deeper than he knew, but Emma swallowed them whole, forcing herself to remain silent. The whispers began to spread. Other diners leaned closer, curious to watch the billionaire's latest target. Emma became painfully aware of every eye on her, of the humiliation building like a storm. She wanted to vanish, to escape the spotlight of his cruelty. But Maxwell wasn't finished. As she placed a dish on the table, he barked, "Late again! Do you even understand punctuality? My time is worth more than your entire existence." His associate shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. No one ever challenged Maxwell Carter. Emma's hands trembled as she steadied the tray. Each word was a knife, each second stretched into eternity. And then, as she adjusted her collar, the silver chain slipped into view. The necklace glimmered under the chandelier's golden light. For the first time that evening, Maxwell's voice faltered. His eyes locked on the locket around her neck, his expression freezing. The insults died on his lips. His face, once carved in arrogance, shifted into something else, something Emma couldn't yet understand. Because in that moment, Maxwell Carter saw a ghost from his past, staring back at him. For a heartbeat, Maxwell Carter seemed paralyzed, his gaze glued to the necklace, his lips parted as if to speak. But then, just as quickly, his mask of arrogance snapped back into place. He shook his head, convincing himself it couldn't be what he thought. The girl was just a waitress, nothing more. And Maxwell Carter never let anyone, especially someone beneath him, see weakness. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, almost dangerous. Emma froze, her hand instinctively reaching up to touch the locket. It belonged to my mother," she whispered, confused by the sudden shift in his tone. The restaurant fell into a hush again, as though the very walls leaned closer. Maxwell's eyes narrowed, the fury in them reigniting, stronger than before. "Your mother?" he scoffed, his voice rising. "Don't lie to me. That necklace is unique. It belonged to my mother, my family. How dare you parade it here like some cheap accessory?" Gasps rippled through the room. Guests exchanged stunned looks. Some leaned forward eagerly, savoring the spectacle. Others lowered their heads, uncomfortable, but too afraid to intervene. Emma shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "I'm not lying, sir. My mother gave this to me before she passed away. It's all I have left of her." But Maxwell wasn't listening. His face hardened, every word dripping with venom. "Do you expect me to believe a nobody like you somehow owns something from my family? No. You stole it. Or worse, your mother stole it. Admit it." The accusation hit Emma like a physical blow. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred with sudden tears. Her mother, gentle, hard-working, selfless, branded a thief in front of strangers. The humiliation was unbearable. "I didn't steal anything," Emma whispered, clutching the locket tightly in her hand, as if holding on to her mother's memory itself. "My mom was an honest woman." Maxwell slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. His associate flinched, while nearby guests gasped. "Enough!" Maxwell roared. "You dare argue with me? Do you know who I am? I could have you fired, blacklisted, erased from every restaurant in this city before the night is over. You're nothing but a thief hiding behind a uniform." The maitre d' rushed forward, wringing his hands nervously. "Sir, please, perhaps we can discuss this." "Stay out of this," Maxwell snapped, not breaking his glare from Emma. "This girl is a disgrace. She doesn't belong in a place like this, dragging her lies and filth into my world." Emma's face burned as whispers swirled louder around her. She could hear fragments. A thief? His mother's necklace? What scandal is this? Every word was a dagger. She wanted to scream, to defend her mother's honor, but her voice cracked in her throat. Instead, silent tears streaked her cheeks. She felt stripped bare, her dignity shredded in front of strangers who would never forget this night. Maxwell leaned closer, his tone dropping to a venomous whisper meant to wound deeper. "If you value what little life you have, take off that necklace. It doesn't belong to you." Emma's fingers clutched the locket tighter, her knuckles white. She shook her head slowly, defiance flickering through her tears. For the first time, Maxwell faltered. He had expected her to break completely, to surrender. But instead, she stood trembling, yet unyielding. And the room held its breath, waiting to see who would shatter first. Because humiliation had reached its peak, and Emma was about to fight back. The restaurant was silent enough to hear a glass drip with condensation. Maxwell's final words hung in the air like poison. "Take off that necklace. It doesn't belong to you." Emma's tears still clung to her lashes, but something inside her shifted. For years, she had swallowed insults, endured humiliation, and carried burdens far too heavy for her shoulders. But this was different. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about her mother, the woman who sacrificed everything and left her only this necklace as proof of love. To give it up now would be betraying her memory. Her chest rose and fell, her hand clutching the locket. Slowly, she lifted her head. For the first time that night, she looked Maxwell Carter straight in the eyes. The trembling in her hands stopped. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the silence like steel. "This necklace is my mother's," she said firmly, "and if you see it around my neck and think of your family, then maybe it's because your world and mine are tied together in ways you're too blind to see." A collective gasp spread across the room. The diners leaned forward, wide-eyed. The billionaire who crushed everyone with his words had just been confronted by a trembling waitress, and she hadn't backed down. Maxwell's jaw tightened. His pride stung like an open wound. "Are you implying—" "I'm not implying anything," Emma interrupted, her voice steady now, gathering strength with each word. "I'm telling you the truth. My mother raised me to work hard, to be honest, to never steal. She died with nothing but this necklace. If you think it's yours, if you think it belonged to your family, then maybe instead of humiliating me in front of strangers, you should ask yourself why." The room erupted in whispers. Even Maxwell's associate lowered his tablet, staring at Emma in stunned silence. The maitre d', usually unshakable, stood frozen. Maxwell's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his life, someone had stripped him of control, with a single sentence. His hand twitched on the table, torn between rage and something far more dangerous. Doubt. Emma's voice softened, but it carried across the room, clear and unwavering. "You may have all the money in the world, Mr. Carter. You may own buildings, companies, even people's fear, but you don't own this." She touched the necklace, her fingers steady now. "You don't own my mother's memory. You don't own me." Silence. Pure, deafening silence. And then the pianist, perhaps without meaning to, struck a single note, a sound that echoed like a gavel. The diners seemed to hold their breath. Something had shifted. The balance of power in the room no longer belonged to Maxwell Carter. It belonged to the girl he had tried to destroy. Maxwell leaned back, his face a storm of confusion and fury. For a man who built his empire on control, this moment was unbearable. His words had always been weapons, but now they had been disarmed by one waitress with nothing but truth. Emma didn't wait for his reply. She lifted her tray, straightened her shoulders, and turned to leave. She wasn't running away. She was reclaiming her dignity. Every pair of eyes followed her, some filled with admiration, others with disbelief. Maxwell's gaze, however, stayed fixed on the necklace, the locket gleaming under the chandelier. And in that gleam, he saw a reflection he could not deny, something that tied him to the very girl he had just tried to destroy. The air inside the silver crown felt electric, charged with something no chandelier or piano note could mask. Emma's words still hung in the room, echoing louder than Maxwell's shouting ever had. Diners whispered furiously, their eyes darting between the billionaire and the trembling young waitress who had just stood her ground. Maxwell sat frozen, his pride collapsing beneath the weight of silence. For the first time in years, he felt small, not because of money or power, but because of a necklace around the neck of a woman he had tried to crush. His associate shifted uncomfortably, sensing the balance of the evening had shattered. Even his bodyguards looked uneasy, no longer sure if they were protecting a man or witnessing his undoing. Emma placed her tray on a nearby table, her back straight, her chin lifted. She refused to shrink again. Though her heart pounded against her ribs, she held on to the strength her mother's memory had given her. She had not let him strip it away. And then something happened no one expected. An elderly woman at a nearby table rose slowly to her feet. She was dressed elegantly, her silver hair swept into a bun, her eyes sharp with recognition. She pointed toward Emma, her voice trembling yet firm. "That necklace," she whispered, and the restaurant quieted again. "I've seen it before, years ago. It belonged to Margaret Carter, Maxwell's mother." Gasps rippled through the crowd. All heads turned back to Maxwell, his face drained of color, the arrogance slipping away. Emma blinked, stunned. "My mother. She never told me where it came from," she said softly, clutching the locket. "Only that it was precious, that it was all she could give me." Maxwell's chest tightened. Memories of his mother flooded back, her warm smile, the star-shaped locket she wore at every family gathering, the way she once whispered about mistakes she could never fix. His throat went dry. Could it be? But pride was a cruel master. He slammed his fist against the table. Lies! This is manipulation! You think you can twist family history with cheap tricks? His words shook, no longer carrying the same authority. The diners didn't believe him. They had seen enough, and in their eyes, the mighty Maxwell Carter had already fallen. Emma, though trembling, spoke again, her voice steady with newfound courage. Believe what you want, Mr. Carter, but I know my mother was no thief, and this necklace, it tells a story you've been too afraid to face. Maxwell's lips parted, but no reply came. His fury was gone, replaced by something worse, shame. For once, his wealth, his power, his reputation, none of it could silence the truth shining from that necklace. The maitre d' stepped forward, his voice unusually sharp. Mr. Carter, perhaps it's best you conclude your evening. The Silver Crown does not tolerate disrespect toward its staff. It was the ultimate humiliation. For a man used to commanding the world, being dismissed like a disruptive guest was unbearable. His associate stood quickly, muttering excuses, while the bodyguards rose, tension thick in their movements. Maxwell pushed back his chair, his face pale, his eyes locked on Emma one last time. But this time, there was no superiority in his gaze, only defeat. Without another word, he left the restaurant, whispers following him like a storm. Emma stood silently, tears finally slipping free. Not of shame, but of relief. She had protected her mother's memory. She had held her ground against a man who thought he was untouchable. As the doors closed behind Maxwell, the diners erupted in applause. Some stood, clapping with admiration. Emma pressed her hand against her necklace, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. That night, Emma walked out of the Silver Crown with her dignity intact, and Maxwell Carter walked out with his pride in ruins. 5 years later, the memory of that night at the Silver Crown still lingered in whispers across New York. For many, it was just a scandal, one more story of a billionaire humbled. But for Emma, it was the night her life shifted forever. Today, she no longer wore a waitress's uniform. Instead, she stood in front of a crowd of young students at a community center, her voice calm but full of conviction. Behind her was a banner that read, "The Holbrook Foundation, Education and Health for Every Child." Emma had founded it herself, with the help of funding that came not from pity, but from truth. After that night, Maxwell could no longer hide from what the necklace revealed. Investigations, family records, and an old letter discovered in his mother's belongings had confirmed what Emma's heart already knew. Her mother was Margaret Carter's lost daughter, which meant Emma was family. Blood, not just coincidence. At first, Emma had resisted the connection. She didn't want money or fame. All she wanted was dignity and safety for her brother. But Maxwell, weighed down by shame, insisted on making things right. He paid for Daniel's treatments, ensuring the boy received the best medical care. Daniel, once fragile and sickly, now laughed on basketball courts and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Every smile on his face was proof that Emma's sacrifices had not been in vain. Emma herself had grown into a leader. With Maxwell's reluctant guidance and her own relentless determination, she turned her pain into purpose. The foundation became her life's work, providing scholarships for kids like Daniel, medical assistance for families drowning in bills, and hope for mothers who feared they had nothing left to give. And though Maxwell had been publicly humiliated that night, something had softened in him. He no longer shouted at waiters. He no longer dismissed the poor as invisible. The truth had humbled him, reshaping his arrogance into something closer to responsibility. Their relationship was not easy. Pride and wounds ran deep. But over time, Emma saw not just a ruthless billionaire, but a broken man trying to honor his mother's memory in a way he never had before. Now, as Emma finished her speech, the audience rose in applause. She smiled, not out of vanity, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, the pain, the scars, and the healing. Back at home, Daniel was waiting, his textbooks sprawled across the kitchen table. He looked up at her with the same admiration he always had. "You killed it again, Em. Mom would be proud." Emma touched the necklace around her neck, the same silver locket that had started it all. Its surface was worn now, but its meaning had only deepened. Inside, the tiny photograph of her mother remained, alongside a new picture Emma had tucked in, her and Daniel, smiling together. She whispered softly, as if speaking to her mother's memory. "We made it." The world outside still glittered with wealth and cruelty, but Emma no longer felt powerless. She had fought for her mother's honor, saved her brother, and carved out a future no one could steal. And the girl once humiliated in front of strangers was now a woman respected by thousands, because sometimes the very thing meant to break you becomes the reason you rise higher than you ever dreamed. For weeks after the scandal at the Silver Crown, Maxwell Carter could not escape the whispers. Newspapers splashed the story across their pages. Ruthless billionaire humiliated by waitress. Social media turned the moment into a spectacle, with clips of Emma's defiant words replayed millions of times. The once untouchable mogul was suddenly human, flawed, vulnerable, even despised. Maxwell's empire didn't crumble overnight, but cracks appeared. Business partners questioned his judgment, investors pulled back, and invitations to elite galas became noticeably fewer. For a man who had built his identity on control and respect, the humiliation cut deeper than any financial loss. At first, he reacted with rage. He fired staff, demanded loyalty, and tried to bury the story under lawsuits and PR campaigns. But none of it worked. The world had seen him exposed, and the truth could not be erased. Alone in his penthouse, staring at the necklace burned into his memory, Maxwell began to unravel. One night, he opened a box of his mother's belongings he had avoided for years. Inside was a collection of letters, yellowed with time, written in her delicate handwriting. Among them was a confession. She had once given birth to a daughter she was forced to give away to protect the family's reputation. That daughter had grown up far from wealth, carrying only a single locket as proof of her connection. The realization shattered him. Emma's claim was no lie. Her mother was his sister, and Emma, the waitress he had tried to destroy, was his niece. For the first time in his life, Maxwell felt ashamed, not just of his public outburst, but of the arrogance that had blinded him for decades. He thought of the countless people he had dismissed, the waiters, the drivers, the employees he had reduced to nothing with his words. He thought of Emma's trembling defiance, her courage to speak the truth even when she stood alone. That shame became a turning point. Slowly, Maxwell began to change. He reached out to Emma, not with arrogance, but with humility. At first she resisted, wary of his motives. But he persisted, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. He covered Daniel's medical bills quietly, attended meetings for Emma's foundation without taking credit, and began redirecting parts of his fortune toward causes he once scoffed at. Business associates noticed the shift. He no longer barked orders but asked questions. He no longer flaunted his power, but listened. For the first time, Maxwell saw his wealth not as a weapon, but as a responsibility. The media, hungry for drama, at first mocked his efforts. But over time, even critics admitted the billionaire seemed different. He funded hospitals, scholarships, and housing projects. He built opportunities for people like Emma, people who had once been invisible to him. Yet the greatest redemption wasn't public, it was personal. When Daniel invited him to his high school graduation, Maxwell sat in the crowd, clapping as though he were any proud uncle. When Emma spoke at her foundation's first anniversary, he stood quietly at the back, tears in his eyes as she told her story, not of wealth, but of resilience. Maxwell would never erase his past, nor the pain he had caused. But he learned that dignity wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. And in Emma's strength, he found the chance to rebuild his own humanity. Because sometimes the greatest fortune isn't power or money. It's the chance to make things right. Daniel had been fragile for as long as he could remember. Childhood for him was not playgrounds and soccer games, but sterile hospital rooms, needles, and whispered conversations Emma thought he couldn't hear. He used to lie awake at night, listening to his sister cry softly in the kitchen, her voice breaking as she counted bills she could never pay. Back then, Daniel often felt like a burden. No matter how many times Emma told him otherwise, he saw the sacrifices she made, the meals she skipped, the second jobs, the exhaustion carved into her face. He promised himself that if he ever got the chance to grow strong, he would repay her. That chance came after the night at the Silver Crown. For the first time, money was no longer a locked door. Maxwell's resources opened worlds Daniel had never dared to imagine. Specialists, treatments, medications that once felt like distant dreams. The hospital he entered now smelled not of despair but of hope. The change didn't happen overnight. The treatments were grueling, the side effects harsh. But Emma was there at every appointment, holding his hand, reminding him he wasn't alone. And surprisingly, Maxwell was there too. Awkward at first, uncomfortable in the fluorescent-lit hallways of pediatric wards, but present nonetheless. He sat quietly in waiting rooms, his presence steady, his gaze softer than Daniel expected. As months passed, Daniel's body began to respond. The coughing fits grew less frequent. The weight he once struggled to maintain returned, slowly at first, then with vigor. The day he ran across the hospital courtyard without gasping for air, Emma burst into tears. It was a moment she had dreamed of for years, but never truly believed she'd see. With health came freedom. Daniel started attending school regularly, making friends he never thought he'd have. He joined a local basketball team, his thin frame filling out with strength and energy. For the first time, he wasn't the sick kid in the corner. He was just Daniel, a boy laughing under the sun, his sneakers pounding the court, his dreams reaching higher than hospital ceilings. But the healing wasn't just physical. It was emotional too. For so long, Daniel had carried guilt, convinced his illness had stolen Emma's future. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their small but comfortable new apartment, he finally voiced the words that had haunted him. "I'm sorry, Em," he whispered, "for everything. For all the nights you stayed up worrying. For making you miss out on your own life." Emma turned to him, her eyes glistening. She placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and loving. "Daniel, listen to me. You never took anything from me. You gave me purpose. You gave me strength when I thought I had none. You're not my burden. You're my reason." Tears welled in his eyes, but for the first time, they weren't from pain or shame. They were from relief. The weight he had carried for years lifted, leaving only gratitude. Years later, when Daniel stood on stage at his high school graduation, strong and healthy, he searched the crowd. He found Emma in the front row, tears streaming down her face, and Maxwell standing tall beside her, clapping with a pride he no longer tried to hide. Daniel smiled, his voice steady as he gave his speech. "This diploma isn't just mine. It belongs to my sister, who gave everything for me, and it belongs to the people who believed I could make it." The audience rose in applause, but Daniel's eyes stayed locked on Emma. Because his healing was not just survival, it was a promise fulfilled. The night at the Silver Crown might have ended in silence, but the world outside erupted like wildfire. By morning, headlines screamed across every major outlet. "Waitress defies billionaire in public showdown." Maxwell Carter humiliated. "Family secret exposed?" "Who is Emma Holbrook, the girl with the necklace?" Clips recorded on shaky phones went viral overnight. Millions watched as a trembling waitress stood her ground against one of the most powerful men in America. Hashtags trended worldwide. hat, necklace. Truth and sash stand with Emma. Strangers who had never set foot in the Silver Crown dissected every second of the video. Her defiant words, Maxwell's rage, the gasps of wealthy diners. For some, it was entertainment, a scandal to fill morning talk shows. But for many, Emma became a symbol. People who had spent years invisible, waiters, cleaners, single mothers, immigrants, saw themselves in her trembling but unbroken stance. She wasn't polished or rehearsed. She was real. Op-eds filled newspapers. In a world obsessed with wealth, Emma reminded us that dignity cannot be bought. Activists praised her courage, while ordinary workers sent messages of solidarity. "You spoke for all of us," one viral post read. But not all reactions were kind. Critics accused her of seeking attention, of fabricating a story to shame a billionaire. Tabloids spun wild theories. Was the necklace stolen? Was Emma secretly planted by Maxwell's rivals? The scrutiny was harsh, invasive. Journalists camped outside her apartment, cameras flashing as she tried to walk Daniel to school. Emma, who had lived her life in the shadows, suddenly found herself under a blinding spotlight. It was overwhelming. At night, she lay awake, torn between pride and fear. Pride that her mother's memory had been defended. Fear that the world might twist her truth into something ugly. Meanwhile, Maxwell faced his own storm. For a man accustomed to controlling narratives, the humiliation was brutal. Shareholders demanded explanations. Talk shows mocked him mercilessly. Former employees came forward, sharing stories of his cruelty. Drivers who had been fired for traffic, assistants belittled for typos. The legend of Maxwell Carter, the ruthless mogul, was crumbling. Yet amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. When Emma's background surfaced, the long shifts, the sick brother, the necklace passed down from her mother, the narrative shifted. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a survivor, a fighter. The public's sympathy deepened, and the calls for accountability grew louder. Letters poured into the restaurant where she once worked. Some were from strangers offering donations for Daniel's medical care. Others were handwritten notes from single parents, widows and workers, thanking her for standing tall when they could not. One letter simply read, "You made me believe my voice matters." The Silver Crown itself became a pilgrimage site. Guests booked tables, not for the food, but to sit where Emma had stood, where she had spoken truth to power. Staff whispered her name with pride, no longer seeing her as the quiet girl carrying trays, but as someone who had changed the narrative for all of them. Even politicians weighed in. Some used her story as proof of systemic inequality. Others called it a distraction. But whether praised or criticized, one thing was certain. Emma's defiance had sparked a conversation far larger than one billionaire's arrogance. Through it all, Emma tried to keep her focus on Daniel, on survival, on honoring her mother. But deep down, she knew her life would never again return to anonymity, because the world had chosen her as its symbol, and symbols are never invisible. The storm of public opinion had only just begun when another shockwave hit, the rediscovery of Margaret Carter's letters. Margaret, Maxwell's late mother, had been a figure of grace and philanthropy in her lifetime. To the outside world, she was the perfect matriarch, elegant, charitable, devoted to her family's legacy. But tucked away in the attic of the Carter estate, sealed inside a cedar chest no one had opened in decades, were letters that told a different story. They were found by a housekeeper, sorting through old belongings. Bound with a faded ribbon, the letters were written in Margaret's delicate handwriting. Their discovery was reported to Maxwell, who opened them with trembling hands. What he read shattered the foundation of his carefully controlled life. In one letter, Margaret confessed to a secret she had carried for over 50 years. As a young woman, before her marriage to Maxwell's father, she had fallen in love with a man her family deemed unacceptable. When she became pregnant, the Carter name was at risk of scandal. Under immense pressure from her parents, she was forced to give the child away. "I was told it was for the best," the letter read, ink smudged with what looked like tears, that our family's reputation mattered more than my happiness. But not a day has passed when I haven't thought of her. I sent her away with nothing but a locket, a star-shaped necklace to remind her she was loved, even if I could not keep her. Maxwell's chest tightened as he read. His mother's locket, Emma's necklace. The connection was undeniable. The daughter Margaret lost was Emma's mother, which meant Emma was not just some stranger with a piece of jewelry. She was blood. Another letter cut deeper. Margaret wrote of her guilt, of the lies she had told even Maxwell himself. "I wanted to tell you," she confessed in shaky script. "I wanted you to know you had a sister. But I was afraid. Afraid of your father's wrath, afraid of what the world would say. Forgive me, my son. One day, the truth will find its way home." Maxwell set the letters down, his hands trembling. All his life, he had carried pride like armor, never questioning the spotless image of his family's past. Now he saw the cracks, the shame, the sacrifices, the humanity his wealth had blinded him to. His mother's secret was no longer buried. It lived, breathing, standing in front of him in the form of Emma. When the letters leaked to the press, the world gasped again. Headlines shifted from scandal to revelation. Carter dynasty, hid child for decades. Waitress Emma Holbrook confirmed as Carter heir. Public sympathy for Emma deepened, while Maxwell faced new scrutiny. Was his cruelty toward her born of arrogance, or of fear that the truth might undo him? Emma, meanwhile, read the letters with tears streaming down her face. Her mother, the woman she had adored, was no thief. She had been the daughter of Margaret Carter, cast aside by circumstances and power. The necklace had not been stolen. It had been a gift of love, passed through generations, waiting for the day it would bring the truth to light. For Emma, the letters were more than history. They were vindication. Her mother's honor was restored. Her own existence was no longer defined by poverty or shame, but by resilience and truth. And for Maxwell, they were a reckoning, proof that the blood he had tried to deny flowed through the veins of the very girl he had once humiliated. The letters left no room for doubt. Margaret Carter's words had tied Emma and Maxwell together by blood. But the truth, once unearthed, does not heal by itself. It demanded confrontation. Maxwell requested a private meeting at his penthouse. At first, Emma resisted. The thought of sitting across from the man who had humiliated her in front of strangers made her stomach twist. But Daniel, wiser now, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You deserve answers," he said. "Not just for Mom, but for yourself." And so one evening, Emma walked into the gleaming Carter penthouse. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, the city glittering beneath them. Yet the opulence felt hollow compared to the weight in her chest. Maxwell stood by the window, his posture rigid, his reflection fractured in the glass. When he turned, he looked older than she remembered. The arrogance had drained from his face, leaving only weariness. "Emma," he began, his voice quieter than she expected. "Thank you for coming." She didn't respond, only took a seat at the marble table, her fingers brushing against the locket at her throat. The silence between them was thick, filled with years of lies and the echo of that terrible night. Maxwell cleared his throat. "I read my mother's letters. There's no denying it anymore. Your mother, she was my sister. That makes you my niece." His words faltered, heavy with guilt. "I accused her of being a thief. I accused you of being a liar. I was wrong." Emma's eyes burned, but she held his gaze. "You didn't just accuse us. You humiliated me. You tore apart the only piece of her I had left in front of people who will never forget it." Maxwell winced as though her words were knives. "I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know. I was blind. Blinded by pride, by control, by the image of a family I thought was perfect. When I saw that necklace, I reacted with fear. Fear that the lies would surface. Fear that the world would see me as weak. I lashed out at you because you reminded me of a truth I couldn't face. Emma leaned forward, her voice trembling but strong. Do you know what that necklace really is to me? It's not about money or power. It's about my mother's love. She wore it through every hardship, and she gave it to me when she died. It's the reason I never gave up. The reason I kept fighting for Daniel. And you tried to strip that away from me. Maxwell's eyes glistened, a sight Emma never thought possible. I see that now, and I hate myself for it. You are stronger than I've ever been. You carried responsibilities that should have broken you, and still you stood in that restaurant and defended her. You defended yourself. You defended truth, something I failed to do my entire life. The silence stretched again, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a wound being exposed to air, painful yet necessary. Emma finally spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I will not carry hate either. My mother deserves peace, and so do I. Maxwell nodded, his shoulders sagging. That's more than I deserve, but if you'll let me, I want to make it right, not with money, but with action, with family. Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she touched the locket, her mother's legacy. Slowly, she nodded. Then prove it. And for the first time, Maxwell Carter bowed his head, not as a billionaire, but as a man stripped of pride, finally ready to face the truth. In the weeks after the confrontation, Emma found herself caught between two worlds. On one side was the life she had always known, late shifts, rent notices, and the fragile comfort of anonymity. On the other side stood the Carter legacy, a vast empire of wealth, power, and influence that now, by blood, belonged partly to her. Maxwell made his intentions clear. You are family, he told her, during one of their tense but increasingly civil meetings. And family has rights, the Carter name, the inheritance, the influence. It's yours as much as mine. I want you to take your place. But Emma wasn't so sure. Late at night, sitting on the edge of her bed, she stared at the necklace and thought of her mother. Would her mother have wanted her to step into the Carter spotlight? Or would she have told her to hold on to the simple life she had fought so hard to preserve? The thought twisted inside her. Daniel, now healthier and stronger, urged her to consider it. Think about what this could mean. College, security, never worrying about bills again. You could change so many lives, not just ours. Emma smiled softly at her brother. His optimism had always been her anchor. But still, doubt gnawed at her. She feared losing herself in the shadow of a name that had once nearly destroyed her. She feared becoming the very kind of person she had always resented. The press didn't make it easier. Articles debated her every move. Will Emma accept the Carter legacy? Waitress turned heiress. Is she ready for power? Strangers speculated on whether she deserved wealth at all. Some championed her as a Cinderella story. Others dismissed her as unworthy, a girl who had stumbled into fortune by accident. One evening, Maxwell invited her to a Carter board meeting. It was a test, though he didn't say so. Emma walked into the towering glass building, its marble lobby echoing with the footsteps of executives who lived and breathed power. Inside the boardroom, she sat among people who had run companies, shaped markets, and wielded influence she couldn't imagine. They looked at her with skepticism, some even disdain. To them, she was a waitress who didn't belong at the table. Their eyes reminded her of Maxwell's glare that night at the Silver Crown. But Emma didn't flinch. When asked about her vision, she spoke not of profits or mergers, but of people, of fairness, of health, of education. She spoke of Daniel, of mothers like hers, of families living on the edge of survival. Her words weren't polished, but they were raw, true, and undeniable. For the first time, the room fell silent. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Afterward, Maxwell approached her privately. "You don't realize it yet," he said quietly, "but you belong here, not because of the Carter name, but because of who you are." That night, Emma stood on her balcony, the city lights glowing beneath her. She thought of her mother's sacrifice, of the life she and Daniel had clawed their way through, of the humiliation that had once nearly broken her. Finally, she made her choice. She would not reject the Carter legacy, but she would not let it consume her either. She would stand with one foot in both worlds, using the Carter name not to elevate herself, but to lift others. Because Emma knew the greatest inheritance wasn't money. It was the chance to rewrite what the Carter family truly stood for. Emma's decision to step into the Carter world, cautiously but firmly, didn't happen in a vacuum. The moment she chose to carry the name, lines were drawn. Some welcomed her with open arms, while others sharpened their knives in the shadows. Her first true ally, of course, was Daniel. He believed in her more than anyone, cheering her on through every speech, every interview, every moment of doubt. "You've already faced worse," he reminded her. "Compared to what we've survived, this is nothing." His confidence became her armor. Maxwell, too, became a complicated ally. His pride still lingered, and his methods often clashed with Emma's softer but steadier approach. Yet in boardrooms and behind closed doors, he defended her against executives who whispered she didn't belong. It was a strange alliance. The billionaire once her tormentor, now her protector. Their relationship was fragile, built on guilt and blood. But it was real. Then there was Mrs. Whitmore, the elderly woman from the Silver Crown who had first recognized the necklace. She reached out to Emma afterward, offering not just confirmation of her mother's past, but wisdom. "People will try to twist your story," she warned. "Don't let them. The truth is your greatest weapon." For Emma, Mrs. Whitmore became a kind of surrogate grandmother, filling a void she hadn't realized she still carried. But where there were allies, enemies soon followed. The Carter boardroom was filled with men and women who had benefited from Maxwell's iron grip. To them, Emma was a threat, not because of incompetence, but because she brought something they couldn't control. Compassion. They mocked her behind closed doors, called her the charity waitress, and waited for her to stumble. Some even whispered to the press, feeding tabloid stories designed to tarnish her credibility. One board member in particular, Richard Hale, made his opposition clear. A sharp-eyed businessman who had his sights set on Maxwell's empire, Richard saw Emma as a convenient pawn. He questioned her ideas in meetings, rolled his eyes at her suggestions, and pushed for decisions that would sideline her influence. "She's a distraction," he sneered one evening. "An amateur. This is no place for fairy tales." Emma felt the sting of his words, but she refused to back down. Each time he tried to dismiss her, she answered with calm determination. Her vision wasn't about fairy tales. It was about families like hers, people forgotten by the system the Carters had helped build. Slowly, some board members began to listen, their skepticism giving way to curiosity. Outside the boardroom, the media remained divided. Supporters hailed her as a modern heroine, while critics painted her as an opportunist clinging to a fortune she hadn't earned. The duality was exhausting, but Emma kept reminding herself of Daniel's words. She had already faced worse. Her greatest strength, however, came not from titles or influence, but from the people she had quietly inspired. Letters still poured in from workers, mothers, and students who saw hope in her story. They were her silent army, rooting for her even as powerful enemies plotted her downfall. Emma knew the road ahead would not be smooth. Power attracted both loyalty and envy. She would stumble, she would be tested, and enemies like Richard would do everything in their power to see her fail. But she also knew this: she was no longer the trembling waitress standing alone in a glittering restaurant. She had allies now, and with them, she would fight to redefine what the Carter legacy truly meant. Emma had always known the Carter Empire was dangerous ground, but she believed that with honesty and determination, she could survive its storms. She had prepared herself for hostility from strangers, from board members who sneered, from critics who wrote venom into newspapers. What she wasn't prepared for was betrayal from someone she trusted. It came quietly, the way most betrayals do. Her foundation, the Holbrook Initiative, had grown rapidly, fueled not only by Carter funds, but by donations from people inspired by her story. She worked tirelessly, balancing board meetings in glass towers with community visits in modest schools and clinics. The dual life was exhausting, but fulfilling. To manage it all, she leaned heavily on her small inner circle. Among them was Clara Bennett, her childhood friend, who had stood by her long before the Carter name entered her life. Clara had been there during hospital nights with Daniel, during ramen dinners when rent was late, during tears Emma couldn't share with anyone else. So when Clara eagerly offered to help with the foundation's finances, Emma didn't hesitate. "No one I trust more," she told her, handing over access to accounts, donations, and contracts. Clara smiled, eyes shining with loyalty, or so Emma thought. But loyalty has a price in the world of wealth. One evening, while reviewing reports, Emma noticed discrepancies. Large sums redirected to shell accounts, donations vanishing into shadows. At first she thought it was a mistake. She stayed up late, cross-checking numbers, her heart pounding. But the more she dug, the clearer it became. Someone had been siphoning money. Her stomach dropped when she traced the trail back to Clara. The confrontation was quiet but brutal. In Emma's office, surrounded by files and invoices, she laid the evidence on the table. Clara's face drained of color. "Emma, please, let me explain." Emma's voice cracked. "Explain how you stole from sick children, from families who trusted us." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her words were sharp. "You don't understand what it's like. Do you know how tempting it is, watching you suddenly become the world's darling? Watching doors open for you while I'm still stuck struggling? You were supposed to be one of us, Emma. But now, you're a Carter. You'll never know what it feels like to be left behind." The words cut deeper than Emma expected. Betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about envy, festering in someone she had once called family. Emma's hands shook as she gathered the papers. "Clara, I would have helped you. You didn't need to do this. But now you've betrayed everything we built." Clara's tears hardened into resentment. "You'll see. The world will turn on you too, just like it did on Maxwell. You can't be both a Carter and a savior. Sooner or later you'll have to choose." When Clara walked out that night, Emma felt a hollow ache she hadn't known since losing her mother. She had endured Maxwell's cruelty, the world's scrutiny, the board's hostility. But this was different. This was personal. News of the embezzlement leaked quickly. Headlines screamed betrayal, questioning Emma's judgment. Critics pounced. Waitress turned heiress, too naive to lead. Donations slowed. Whispers spread that she was careless, unfit. For the first time since stepping into the Carter world, Emma doubted herself. She lay awake, clutching the necklace, wondering if Clara was right, if trying to live in two worlds meant she would lose both. And as the betrayal spread like wildfire, Emma realized her fight for dignity wasn't over. It was only entering its darkest chapter. The betrayal cut deep, but what followed was worse. Emma had always believed that truth and hard work would protect her. Yet as the days passed, it became clear. Even the strongest foundation could crumble when poisoned by doubt. The headlines turned vicious. Emma Holbrook's charity in crisis. Was the waitress heir too inexperienced to lead? News outlets replayed clips of Emma trembling in the restaurant years earlier, twisting them into a narrative of weakness. Donors withdrew support. Invitations to speak were quietly rescinded. The Holbrook Initiative, once a beacon of hope, now stood on the edge of collapse. Board members used the scandal to their advantage. Richard Hale, her most vocal critic, seized the opportunity. "We warned you," he said smugly during a tense meeting. "This is what happens when emotion leads instead of experience. We cannot allow sentimentality to sink this company or this family." Maxwell slammed his fist on the table. "Enough. She has more courage than this entire board combined." But his defense, though fierce, could not erase the damage. The Carter name had survived scandals before, but Emma's foundation was new, fragile. It bled trust with every rumor. At home, Daniel watched his sister with growing concern. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she rubbed her temples late into the night, the bills piling on her desk as donations dried up. "You don't have to do this alone, Em," he pleaded. "Let Maxwell help. Let someone help." But Emma shook her head. "This was my promise. To Mom. To you. If I let it collapse, then everything we fought for, everything she sacrificed, was for nothing." Still, the weight was crushing her. Then came the final blow. A televised interview, once meant to showcase her foundation's successes, turned into an ambush. The host, armed with leaked documents, grilled her mercilessly about the missing funds. Though Clara had stolen them, Emma was painted as careless, naive, unfit to lead. Cameras captured her faltering, her voice cracking as she tried to defend herself. The next morning, headlines declared, "Emma Carter breaks down on live TV." The humiliation was unbearable. It felt like the silver crown all over again, an audience watching as her dignity was stripped away. Only this time, the stakes were higher. This time she wasn't just a waitress. She was a symbol, and symbols weren't allowed to stumble. That night, Emma sat alone on her balcony, the necklace heavy against her chest. The city lights twinkled below, but she felt only darkness. "Maybe Clara was right," she whispered to the stars. "Maybe I don't belong in this world." For the first time in years, Emma considered giving up, closing the foundation, retreating from the Carter name, disappearing into anonymity. She imagined herself back in a small apartment, waiting tables quietly, invisible once more. The thought was both comforting and crushing. But then, a memory surfaced, her mother's tired smile, her voice soft but steady. "Never let anyone take your dignity, Emma. Even if the world calls you nothing, you must know you are something." Emma clutched the necklace, tears burning her cheeks. She was at her lowest, her empire in ruins, her reputation shredded. Yet in that despair, a spark remained. Because Emma knew one thing. She had faced